All right, this we're going from a 500 level to a 100 level. We're going to be talking about PowerShell, and just a little. He's already mentioned me. A lot of things. But the other thing I like to say is I'm a big computer, and if any of y'all are familiar with Ghost in the Shell, I went to that movie thinking that there'd be a sellout, and when I got there, I was like the only there. But it's a great science fiction if you've ever seen it. I've also got a love for hardware. I like to build high-performance computers. I also have a rack where I set up a lot of virtual machines. You can buy a server for $300 or $400 that support 20 different Windows machines. But what was really cool is I took that rack and I put these blue lights around it, and I love it with my blue lights. And then there's a picture of my workstation. My next project is what I'm calling the Hacker Hideout. I'm going to take this trailer right here and make it look like this. Anyway, today I'm going to talk about PowerShell. And if you ask good questions, I've got these bad boy hats that I'm going to give out to people. Are y'all excited about the bad boy hats? So you have to have good questions. I want it to be interactive. And also, I've got some big money hats too. So if you ask some questions, you might be able to pick a hat that you like. So basically, I want you to learn a little bit about PowerShell and get excited about it, especially if you've never used it. And so this is about the hats. First of all, I'd like just get to know a little bit about you. How many of y'all are pen testers? Just throw a hand up. And anybody in IT networking? Okay, any SharePoint people? Just a few. DBAs? Nobody? Software developers? Okay, and then how many are hackers? Everybody should be bringing their hands up. Any of you currently using PowerShell? Anybody using 2.0? 3.0? Okay. So if you've already used PowerShell, you may not get too much out of it, but I do want your input if you can add something. Maybe I'll say something, you can say, well, you can also do this. And so the thing about PowerShell is a really neat tool to look at one machine or many machines. And the other thing is, the thing about PowerShell is based on the .NET platform. So anything that you can do in the .NET platform, PowerShell can do it, which is pretty much anything in Windows. The other thing I like about PowerShell, it's a great way to automate processes. Yesterday I was watching this capture the flag and some of the things they do. PowerShell would be a great tool for capture the flag because you can use this tool for some of the repetitive work. Now PowerShell, this is just a few things you can do with it. You can use it to manage your Active Directory. You can use it to do backups, restore, exchanges. As this list shows, you can pretty much do anything using PowerShell in your Windows environment. There's a huge gallery of tools where you can take someone else's PowerShell script. Microsoft's got a PowerShell gallery of over 1,000 scripts. I often use that as a reference. You get on GitHub, there's 15,000 projects that use PowerShell. And then the one I like is one called Auto SP Installer. I use it often for a reference because it's got 7,500 lines of PowerShell code. And what it does, it's a tool for installing and configuring SharePoint. But I'm just amazed how this person a couple of developers have used this tool to do things like reboot the server, and when it comes back, it knows exactly where it's at in the PowerShell script. So what's the big deal with PowerShell? Well, really the big deal is Microsoft is going this direction basically for security. They over the time, they've realized with scripts, like in the Linux environment, you can take scripts or you can take commandlets and add them together and make other commandlets. And the GUI in Windows is huge. It takes up a lot of space. And Microsoft is moving away from this GUI for server developers. In fact, there's a new server that's been out for a while called a Nano server. Windows Server is 20 gigabytes of data. Most of that's security and GUI. The Nano server is a half a gig. So they really lowered made the footprint much smaller. And I'm going to get into PowerShell in a second once I get over a few more of these slides. The other thing is it has improved security when you use PowerShell. Now, I was at this conference maybe 2 or 3 years ago. There was a fellow that came up here, and he did a presentation on PowerShell, and he showed how to get passwords. And that just kind of blew my mind. And I thought it was smoke and mirrors, but it's actually, he was able to do that. And Microsoft have come up with ways to prevent that from happening. So even though it is a powerful tool, it can open up some vulnerabilities. A little bit of history, and then I'm going to jump into PowerShell. PowerShell started in 2003. It was called Monet. This guy named Jeff Stover spent years. Well, the Monet project was, they wanted to have Linux and Windows both using the same kind of platform. And they worked real hard on it, and they got it working, but it took so much work to develop stuff, they decided it wasn't very useful. And the whole time, Bill Gates is telling this fellow named Jeff Snovers, use the .NET framework, use the .NET framework. And Jeff said, well, okay, I'll give it a try. And when he did, he put these wrappers around the .NET framework, snippets, and he came out with PowerShell 1. And in 2006, I used it, and it wasn't that good to me. It felt like DOS. And then when version 2 came out, it was a lot better, but it still wasn't quite there for me. When version 3 came out, that's when I really saw the power of PowerShell, and ever since I've been kind of hooked with it. Right now we're at PowerShell 5. So I'm going to jump into PowerShell and just show you what it looks like. And the first thing I wanted to give you an idea of some of the things it can do. I mean, it's nice to run a PowerShell, but some of you may not really know what it can do. There's several ways to start it. PowerShell is built in Windows 10, and if you go down here to, oh, thank you. Let's see if we can get that back. So you are watching. Let's see. Did I lose a... Okay. Thank you. All right. So the way you start PowerShell, there's actually 2 versions. There's one's called... it's just a PowerShell command prompt. It looks something like this. And you can type in your commands and get them that way. And the other way, now I've got it on my taskbar. I could come into my start menu, and then near the bottom is Windows, PowerShell. I like to use what's called the ISE. And I'm going to start that up, and I'm going to load up a script. So this is the ISE, and what the ISE is, it's just a place you can write your scripts and then execute them. It's got several windows. The top part here is the script. The bottom is a place where I can also type in commands. Like so. And I'm actually going to switch this sideways. And so what I'll first start off is, this is a PowerShell script. And if it starts with a pound sign, it's basically a comment. And so I've got some comments here. Typically, when you look at PowerShell, you may see something of this format. This is also a comment. It's a less than and pound sign. And the convention we use is we have .author, and we'll put the author's name. But these are, you can put anything in here, but this is the convention that's used by PowerShell developers. And if I scroll down, we'll look at our first PowerShell command. Now, PowerShell typically starts off, it's a verb dash noun. Like here, start dash process. And if I wanted to start Excel, I could say start dash process Excel. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and pass a parameter to it. And I got Excel started. You're probably going, well, big deal. I mean, I can just click on an icon. Well, this is just a getting started. So maybe I want to start up Word, same kind of thing. So any kind of application that you want to start, you can do a start dash process. I don't have to pass a parameter. I can just say start process Notepad. So to get started with PowerShell, what I often suggest to people is, each day when you come into work, set up a script, and there's probably some things you do each day to get started with your work. Like you probably go to the browser and start things up. While we're here, we also have these things called aliases. So sometimes if you look at a PowerShell script, you'll say, well, it doesn't have the start dash process. Like here, I'm doing a start Notepad, but you notice it doesn't say start dash process, it's just start Notepad. And the reason is that's referred to as an alias. So sometimes when you run PowerShell, you'll see things that don't follow the convention. But we have another PowerShell command called get-alias. And if I do a get-alias start, I can see that alias is the start process. Or if I want to look at all of them, I can hit that, and I'll get a list of all the aliases on my system. Now, the other thing you may often do is start a browser. And here's where often in the morning I have to warm up servers by going to a browser site or going to a site. So to start a browser, you basically say start process like we did earlier and provide a URL. And so, oops, I'm not connected. Hold on one second. Nobody's got any questions for a hat? Yeah. In his case, he's sensitive, and he gets a hat. Oh, man. He's a bad boy. All right, let me make sure my network is. Okay. Yeah, this is. Okay. All right, so let's give this a minute for my network to start up. Okay, yeah. Well, this is mostly based around Windows. I'm not familiar with Iron Python, but why don't you come up here and get your hat? Okay. That's a good question. There's a variable called ps-version table, and come up here and get your hat, and it will tell you which version it is. What operating system are you running? Yeah. Well, if it's Windows 10, it's probably 4 or 5. But again, the answer would be to check the version. Let me. Good point. Come up here and get your hat. In fact, this fellow said he had worked with PowerShell. Really good experienced PowerShell people often will write their code in version 2.0 because then they can port it to 3, 4, 5, or 5. So let me try to start this process again. Not quite connected. Hopefully I can get connected. Yeah. Okay. Now I'm connected. So I can start opening up web pages. In fact, this one particular web page is the PowerShell.org. If you're really interested in learning more about it, they've got some ebooks here, videos, podcasts, pretty much anything you need to have to learn more about PowerShell. The other thing I like to do is sometimes I'll start up several servers, websites at the same time, but I found out you need to put like a 1-second delay as these different browsers start. And so here I can start, 3 or 4 sessions at the same time. It does, and that's a good question, and grab your hat. It does take your default browser, but I'm going to show you how to get around that. Another site is the SharePoint Gallery, and then there's GitHub. But back to your question about the default browser, if you want it to start with a different browser right here, if you'll notice I do a start process, and here I want to start Chrome. And so I will basically provide the Chrome executable. I don't, no, I haven't. Come grab a hat. But anyway, this is an example of how to start your browser, but basically use a different browser. So you'd have to go to the executable and then pass the argument list. And so when I run this, I'm basically going to start up Chrome. Oh, something's not going right. Oh, I skipped. What I'm doing is I'm passing, I'm building a string with the CarolinaCon.org and putting it into a variable. And so now I've started Chrome with my PowerShell. Some other things you're going to do, I'm not going to do it here, but you can also pass credentials. There's a credential module where you put the username, password, and so if you're doing some testing where you have to log into the different sites, this would be a way to have that automated. Now, another thing I do a lot with PowerShell, I'm constantly searching for strings. PowerShell does have an encryption, but we're not going to be talking about it today. Come grab a hat. There was another question? Right. Right. So that's a good question. When you run in PowerShell and you're doing what they call PowerShell remoting, at that point you're using the PowerShell executable on the remote box. Okay? Come grab your hat. We got down to 2. I might save one hat because you may not stay the whole session. Go ahead. Excuse, I can't. I still can't hear you. Can you come up? Oh, yeah. Um, I don't know. Go ahead and grab that last hat. I don't know because, I mean, I start up Chrome, but I don't do a lot with Chrome as far as, putting add-ins and taking them out. And as I said earlier, anything you do in .NET Framework, you can do with PowerShell, but Chrome is a little bit of a different animal, and so I don't know for absolutely sure.
So I use a lot of web services stuff that's built into .NET.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even need to open it up. I just have PowerShell kind of reaching power locate, reaching memory, and then I modify stuff, and then I post that.
Right.
So I can use just post and not working. But yeah, you can do a lot of cool stuff.
Right.
Anything you do in .NET.
And I'm going to show a little bit of that as I get further on here. So the other thing I do a lot is I'm always searching for strings. And you would think it would be search string, but in PowerShell it's called select string. So if I wanted to search for the pattern hello, I would specify a path. And then when I executed this, it found hello in these three different files. I can put a string in there, or I can use a regular expression. The other thing is that if you're pen testing, it's a great tool if you want to look through a lot of log files, searching for like error or warning. And then what I could do is I could put this in a script, maybe analyze those warnings, and then from there maybe send an email to me if something looks critical. The other thing about PowerShell, like when you do a dir, we call it a get child item. So if I wanted to look at a list of files, it would be get child item. But I can use the dir command, and the reason I can use the dir command is because dir, D-I-R, is really an alias. So if I do a get alias of, I thought I had a get alias in here. I don't. But anyway, if I type get alias dir, it would show me this get child item. I can look at event logs. And so here I just quickly did a look of all my events in my event log and how many I had. And then I can do other things like maybe I want to look at the newest 15 events in my system event log. So I could pass some parameters, and that would be some of the stuff I'd find in there.
So this is the third thing.
Uh-huh.
LS is also another.
Okay, yeah. Mm-hmm.
For that limit to
Right.
thing, right?
Good point. The other thing, I can, so often we do a ping. In PowerShell, it's called test connection. So if I did a test connection, you can see it's doing a ping. But the difference between this ping and a regular ping is I can specify I want to ping several items at the same time. Or what I like here, if you look down at the bottom, I can ping by impersonating a person's credentials. So that gives you a lot more flavor or a lot more variety of things you can do. Now what I'm going to do here, I'm going to do a ping, and this is just a variable that I'm building, and I'm going to do a test ping, and I'm going to take my results, and I'm going to put it in this variable called status, $status. And when I do that, you don't see anything, but if I was to select the status and then execute it, I can see the results of my ping. But the thing about this ping, this test connection, this is a piping where I'm going to pipe out a format, and you'll see the ping actually returns a lot more additional information than just that the ping's been reached. Then the other thing to show you, and then I'm going to get more into some of the basics. Again, I was listening to Capture the Flag and how they often put things into a form. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to start up this form called Facebook. So I'm going to pass this URL into this $ URL. And I'm going to create a new object. And so basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to pre-fill the form. And so I've got this URL. I'm going to create an object. I'm going to create an object that's based on Internet Explorer. And so I've got an object instantiated. And right now you can't see it, so I have to make it visible. So I'm going to say IE is visible. And you'll see right here, it showed up, but there's nothing in it. So what I'm going to next do is I'm going to turn on, I'm going to navigate to this URL that I put in here. And now I should be seeing Facebook. Now here's a username and password. And what I have to do is I have to do an F12 to get to the developer's tools to look at the code. And last night, for some reason, my F12 was disabled, so I didn't have time to figure out what was going on. But when you do F12, you're going to see the source code, and in the source code, there's an element called email. And what I can do is I can say ie.document.getElementBy, and I can pass in this bogus email address. And so when I execute that, and then if I jump back over to my Facebook, you see it put the bogus in there. So now I can pre-fill forms. Then I could, I'm going to go ahead and put a password in there. This is an invalid password. And then I'm going to execute. And if I go back to Facebook, you wouldn't see the password because it's got those little dots. Oops. And then finally, I'm going to hit the login button, and then it's going to fail because that was an invalid password. So again, if you're thinking in terms like capture the flag and you're going to different forms and you're looking for flags, you could use PowerShell to kind of automate some of this stuff for you. So that's just a few of the things that you can do with PowerShell. But it's actually, what PowerShell really is, it's a tool to build tools. And before you can build tools, you have to learn more about PowerShell. And I kind of think of that as a discovery. And when I first started learning PowerShell, it was kind of a little bit aggravating because every time I wanted to do something, I had to do a get help. And PowerShell has a great help routine. Of course, you can Google it. But as you work with PowerShell more and more, you're going to find the get help does a pretty good job for you. So everything is documented in help. In fact, the first time you go to help, what happens is it actually goes up to Microsoft, it gets the latest help files, and it will download it. So when you do it the first time, you may have about a minute or two of wait time because it's bringing down all those help files. And then periodically, you may want to use this update help to refresh the help files. For those that work in Azure, Microsoft is constantly changing the PowerShell commands, so people that work in Azure constantly have to update these help files. So one of the help things that we looked at was we did this thing called Start Process. So if I wanted to learn more about Start Process, I would just do a get help start process, and it'll tell me all about it and how it works and all the parameters. But the thing about get help, probably the thing I use more common than anything is I'll do a get help, and I'll say, give me examples. Because once I see an example, it'll be a whole lot clearer on how I want to use the tool. And when I do that get help examples, what you'll see, here's example one. they may have one or more examples on different things that you can do with that particular command. So I'm not going to go through all these, but you know, there's one called Get Help Full, and then there's one called Get Help Online. And basically what that does, it goes online and gives you a browser view of it. Same thing with Get String or Select String. I did a Get Help on it. So Get Help is your big friend, but a lot of times you don't know what to get help on. I mean, if I'm writing a PowerShell command, what commands do I have? Well, PowerShell, they have a get command. And basically, the get command will tell you all the different commands within PowerShell. So if I do a get command, you can see that there's just hundreds of commands. Well, as you work with PowerShell for a while, you'll start realizing a lot of commands will start with start, or a lot of them be create, or get. The verbs are kind of common with all the different commands. In fact, if I look through here, you can see that Microsoft's been pretty consistent. You know, you got your get verb with different nouns, exporting, enabling, dismounting, clearing, adding. Quite a bit of functions and features in PowerShell. Maybe I just want to look at the verbs with the start command. Right? So I could do a get command, verb, start, and then I'd see all those. And so what I would encourage you to do is when you're playing around at home with PowerShell, just kind of do some exploration about all the different commands and start thinking, what could you do at your desktop each morning to automate some of the processes. Now, you know, this PowerShell, not only can it automate things that a network administrator can do, it can automate things on your desktop. It can automate things in Word, Excel, PowerPoint. I haven't seen really anything that I cannot automate using PowerShell. This is a real common PowerShell command is doing a get service. You look at all the services that are running, and just like Linux, we have a piping option, and I've been doing some piping already, but the piping is this guy right here, and basically I'm saying I want to get the services, and then I want to sort it by name, and when it executes, I've got them all. Well, maybe I don't want to look at the ones that are. Maybe I don't want to look at all of them. Maybe I just want to look at all the services that start with SE. So I could wildcard it by saying get service SE wildcard, and then I'll get a smaller list of commands. And then even from that, maybe I don't want to look at all of those. I just want to see the ones that are running. Well, I can pass that into a script and say I've got a where object, and the where object, I want to see if the status is equal to actually, I want the one that equal to not stop. And so here I can look at all the processes that are running. And then the other big useful command in PowerShell is this one called get member. This is going to kind of sound like you're a developer. And when you're writing PowerShell scripts, you are somewhat of a developer. And if you are a developer, you know often you have methods and properties. Well, all these services or commandlets have properties. And so I can take like this get service and pipe it into the get member, and what I will see all the methods that are associated with the get service and all the properties. So it kind of helps you understand more of some of the things you can do with that particular service. Any questions? Oh, okay. Oh, no, yeah. Like when I was doing that select string, let's say I was looking for Social Security numbers and I had a regular expression, I could put that, it said the parameter was dash pattern, and I put a string in there, but I could put a regular expression and it would recognize it and then search for things that match that regular expression. Okay? Anything else? Right. Yeah. There are options in the select string to manipulate the output. So, yes and no. Any other questions? For security? Yeah, that's a good point. On GitHub, there's a PowerShell. Was that the one that actually gets your password?
I can do a lot of stuff.
Excuse me? PB Kitten? Okay. Yeah, I'm still amazed about that one. A lot of the PowerShell developers in Redmond I know, and I was telling them about that at a PowerShell summit, and I don't think they really believed me. And then about a year later, they were speaking at DerbyCon, and they were actually talking about that and how to protect yourself from that. So Microsoft is doing quite a bit to protect that, and hopefully next year I can give you a session on how to protect yourself from people accessing your passwords using PowerShell. Any other comments or questions? Here's I don't use this one much, but this is called Get PS Drive, and basically what this does, this gets your aliases, your certification, certs, functions, regedit, your C and D drives, or whatever hard drives you have. The other common module I use is called Get Content, and basically that Get Content is a way to display data. So if I was to do a Get Content, here I've got a PowerShell command, and basically all in that PowerShell command I'm doing is I'm doing what's called a write host, and the write host is a PowerShell command that basically outputs something to your monitor. Again, you see the write-host, write is your verb, and then a noun. I could also have done the same thing with type, T-Y-P-E, because that's a common command on many different operating systems. And the reason that works is because there's an alias associated with it. Type is a get content. You can also execute PowerShell scripts. Basically, you'd say something like PowerShell.exe and then pass it to script. And so I often do this in bat files or something where I want something scheduled to happen. And basically, that script got executed. You know, here it says hello world, hello world. This was the script. This is where I'm writing host. And then here's where it actually got executed. Another way to execute PowerShell scripts is just prefix them with the ampersand. And then, so there's many different ways to execute scripts. Looks pretty much the same. Now, the security, when you start up PowerShell, they have a security model associated with it. The first thing I always do when I try to run PowerShell is they have these different policies. And the first thing I do is just try to run it without any policies applied because they get in my way. And so if you can run if you can execute this script and you don't get any red messages, this is just saying you're turning it on. Okay. It failed because when I started PowerShell, I didn't start it off as in administrator mode. But they do have scripts, or they have an execution policy And what you do is once you get your scripts written where you want to go in production, you might apply a signature on it. And then that's one way to protect yourself is to have signed scripts, and then only signed scripts get executed. So I've now kind of going into the getting started. I mean, the first part is the get help, all the different ways to see how you can find out how PowerShell works, what kind of commands you have. That just takes a while to become familiar with it. Over time, there's probably going to be 5 or 10 that you use all the time. But the very basics, anything you start with a $, you're setting up a variable. Typically, it's a string variable. For example, if I want to say hello world, I'll just say $var, hello world, and then execute that. And the other thing, I've been executing one line at a time by selecting it and coming up here and executing it or hitting F8. If I hit this guy, F5, it just runs the whole PowerShell script at one time. But the way I kind of work when I'm writing my PowerShell is I basically get lines going and working, and then I just kind of step through it. And even when I go to a customer site, I've got all these scripts to do a lot of different things, and I just don't go in there and just run that script. I'd like to, but it takes so much time getting all your error handling in there. I often find it more of an advantage to just go in there, select a few lines, execute it, select a few lines. Sometimes things will fail because things are already created, and I can see that when I go line by line. But if I really got hardcore, I would have all kind of error trapping in there. So that sets up a variable, and if I put it in double quotes, it's going to set up a string. So if I set up these two string variables and then added them together, what that really is going to do is it's going to concatenate these two strings. So I concatenate it to two strings. Now, if I was to put a number in there instead, and take these two numbers and then add them, if I look at the results, it will add them up. Now, for those who are developers, you probably know it's not a good idea to have variables set up where they could be a string or an integer. And so if you really want to, refine your variables, especially if they're numbers, there's a different kind of data types you can define. Like here, I'm setting up an integer. Variables, here's another variable that's used a lot. Sometimes you just want a list of items, and we use this @ sign, double quote, and then ends it with a double quote @ sign, and that creates a list of items. And so I'm going to pop that into a variable called grocery list. And then if I was to expose that grocery list, you just see the items in there. I'm going to skip this because this is I can't execute it because I don't have SharePoint on here. But this right here, this add snap in, what that does is, let's say I was working with SharePoint. Well, PowerShell doesn't know about SharePoint, and if I wanted to know about it, I'll have to add a snap in. In this case, it's going to be SharePoint PowerShell. If I was working with SQL, and I wanted to know to understand what SQL was, I'd bring in the SQL module. If I was working with maybe the Active Directory or some of the other tools in Windows, I may have to add those particular add-ins to PowerShell. And so once you do add them in there, then you can pretty much execute more items within PowerShell. All right, just a few more items, setting up arrays. Here I'm basically going to take 4 numbers, and make it the value Z. Because it saw these more than two numbers in there, it automatically built an array. So if I want to look at the third item in that array, I'd wrap it around with brackets, and I'd see the number 8. You can define functions. I've showed you roughly 300 lines. I mean, I could go through and there's just tons and tons of stuff in PowerShell. But the key to really learning PowerShell is just start using it. And
So a lot of the stuff he's been showing is just command after command. There's a lot of looping to do. There's for each, there's while loop, there's if statements. You do a lot of cool stuff. One thing I use a lot is I import CSV files. And I just loop through those objects. So like as he was testing that web page for credentials, you could actually have it load in from a spreadsheet of like maybe web addresses, credentials you want to test, go through them, see, if you actually do get a login, stop and say, hey, I got my credentials there, or something like that. So there's a lot of power.
thank you. Yeah. Like earlier, I was showing you the agenda. I was talking about arrays and constraints and functions. All of these samples right here, if you go to that PowerShell.org site, they've got examples of all of these different items. As this fellow was speaking about do-whiles and looping, for if statements, writing to files, saving to HTML. I've seen some really cool, in fact, I've seen some really cool reports that have been generated as HTML. And on that PowerShell site that I showed you earlier, there's a whole white paper about 50 pages on how to generate reports using HTML and PowerShell. Any other questions or comments? Already got that's yeah, it's in beta now. Right. As I said earlier, this is Microsoft's direction. They're everything they're doing now is going into PowerShell. Last year or so, if I did an installation, I'd use a wizard or something to do the installation. Now I have to use PowerShell.
So a lot of the stuff has things management, different management, things like that. And then newer stuff, they kind of seem to go out for PowerShell for you. So you're going to set up something, you actually output PowerShell and do PowerShell.
And
Windows remoting is a big thing. There's all about the talk about the PowerShell remoting, so you can remote and manage your entire environment. My company, we use Cisco UCS platform, Unified Computing. There's Cisco UCS actually has an entire PowerShell management as well. You could actually just like, and even with VMware, you could actually spin up but you could actually manage the UCS platform to build out your network, all VMware, manage VMware, spin out a SharePoint environment, all that stuff. You could easily build out like everything from hardware all the way up to your OS and then you can do stuff on top of it.
yep.
Pretty
Cool, here now.
Brian.
Thank you, Brian. Yeah, earlier I was showing you my servers. That's exactly what I do. I've got PowerShell scripts that basically do the installation, and then once Windows is installed, it will then go through and start installing SharePoint and configuring it. And I've got it down where it takes like 30 minutes, where it used to take, it used to take, 2 to 4 hours to do a full installation and configuration. But with SSD drives and faster processors, it's been reduced quite a bit.
So back to before you started using PowerShell.
Uh-huh.
How much of a force multiplier is that for you? How much power do you save? Twice as fast or half
Oh.
again, or?
That's a good question. When I first started doing installations of SharePoint for a client side, I'd say it takes 40 hours. And most of that is because they wouldn't have things ready. Now, I can do it in 2 hours, but I'll tell them 4 or 8 hours. Because in my PowerShell, I have all these parameters. And now I can specifically say, I need this value, I need to know what your IP address is, what your host name is. All the configuration questions can be answered. And then I can execute it, and it's done. And if it doesn't, if it's not right, I can rebuild it real quick. But yeah, I say I've gone from a week to 2 to 4 hours.
What is the word of night?
Yeah. And I'm just constantly seeing new ways to do automation. But I mean, I'm still on premise. I mean, the whole world's been moving to the cloud. But even in the cloud, that's how everything is managed now with PowerShell. Is anybody using Azure or WAS? So you already know PowerShell, right? Right. So for those people that are network administrators, I mean, this is the future. So you need to jump in and learn as much PowerShell. And that's not all. There are two PowerShell user groups meetups. There's one in Raleigh, and there's one in Charlotte. And we meet once a month, and people will talk about different things, and you can learn so much easier when you have colleagues. Both of them have about 10 to 20 people that attend regularly. And then, to really get into PowerShell, they have the PowerShell games. And the PowerShell games, it's another exciting way to learn a lot about PowerShell. What we do in the PowerShell games is somebody will throw out a simple problem. And then all the people in the field or out in the audience will try to solve the problem using PowerShell. And so they will have an award for the person who does it the fastest. Then they may have an award for the person who does it the slickest way. Or maybe an award for the person who does it with the fewest lines of code. I mean, sometimes you could have one long chain of PowerShell commandlets that would do whatever the problem was. So it's just interesting to see how everybody thinks differently on solving a PowerShell problem. Well, go ahead.
What kind of environment variables, are they environment variables you can pull to the shell and interact with, like Microsoft, Windows? Oh yeah. You could, with PowerShell, you could touch almost anything with WMI, ADSI, pretty much anything. Like I built PowerShell scripts to, pull out, how much RAM is in the machine and, my processor type and all that stuff. There's a script on there. Definitely something that at least that's what to learn a little bit with the PowerShell stuff. So he was showing you how to launch PowerShell with like hitting the PowerShell button. Then there are stuff out there in the exploit world where you can launch PowerShell and it's never even .NET is the only for Microsoft Windows. You can actually launch a PowerShell based and
Yep. Right. Well, I'll hang around if you have any other questions. I appreciate everybody showing up today. I wasn't expecting that many people Sunday morning. Thank you.